High society. In the modern world, the boundaries of this concept are quite blurred and subjective. However, in New York during the second half of the 19th century, the Gilded Age, high society had a single defining attribute, and it came in the form of one small card, an invitation to an evening hosted by Mrs. Astor. Caroline Webster Schermerhorn Astor, famously known as the Mrs. Astor, presided over New York's high society with an ironclad grip, dictating its customs, its hierarchy, and even its calendar. So powerful was her influence that her meticulously curated social schedule became a subject of public fascination. Each winter, her opulent Fifth Avenue mansion became the epicenter of the city's elite gatherings. She hosted an array of exclusive events, but no occasion rivaled the Mrs. Astor's legendary annual ball, an event so prestigious that an invitation signified one's unquestionable standing in New York society. So let's explore who was Mrs. Astor, and how did it happen that, in a male-dominated world shaped by the remnants of the Victorian era, she alone held the power to grant entry into high society? Before we start, please support my channel by clicking like and subscribe buttons. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, née Webster Schermerhorn, was born on September 21, 1830, into a family of Danish aristocrats who were direct descendants of New York's original settlers. Her father, Abraham Schermerhorn, was involved in the shipping business, and by the time Lena, Caroline's childhood nickname, was born as the ninth child in the family, his personal fortune had already reached $1 million. In 1830, the Schermerhorns lived on Greenwich Street, but as the city expanded, they moved north in search of peace and quiet, settling at 36 Bond Street. Their new home neighbored the fashionable district of Lafayette Place, which had been developed by the grandfather of Caroline's future husband. Both families belonged to the so-called Knickerbockers, a term derived from the knee-length breeches worn by the early Dutch settlers, a designation that underscored their status as descendants of New York's founding elite. The Knickerbocker world was one of sober, respectable people living in dignified homes. They were lawyers and businessmen, while their wives dressed expensively yet modestly. Knickerbockers married only among their own, and dined at precisely set times in each other's homes. This was an exclusive society, a tribe that fiercely guarded its cultural and ethnic boundaries. According to long-standing traditions, noblemen and their wives bore double surnames, combining their paternal and maternal family names, as a marker of aristocratic lineage. However, Caroline's ambitions extended far beyond the conservative confines of Knickerbocker society. Following the example of European royalty, she persuaded her husband to drop the second part of his surname, Backhouse, though many historians argue this was less about aristocratic imitation and more about the unfortunate meaning of backhouse, an archaic term for an outdoor toilet. And so, she became Mrs. Astor, and later, the Mrs. Astor. However, even a distinguished lineage, immense wealth, and boundless ambition would not have been enough to elevate Caroline to the pinnacle of New York society. Her ascent was aided by Ward McAllister, an ambitious Southerner who, as a young man, had been swept up in the gold rush alongside his father. Later, he established himself in a law firm and spent years traveling through the Old World, studying the customs, etiquette, and way of life of the European elite. Upon returning to America, he settled in New York with his wife, gaining a reputation as an expert and guardian of high society traditions. Together with 11 friends, drawn from both the old Knickerbocker families and the most presentable nouveau riches, he founded an exclusive social circle, at the head of which he envisioned none other than Mrs. Astor. This elite group held a grand gathering only once a year, and it became known as the 400. The event was so exclusive that it soon became infinitely desirable, with invitations fetching astronomical sums if they could be acquired at all. The primary requirement for all attendees was to first pay their respects to the hostess of the evening. No one was permitted to approach even their closest friends or family before acknowledging and expressing admiration for Mrs. Astor herself. Contemporaries described Caroline as an eminently dignified yet exceedingly cautious woman. She never made ambiguous remarks, could be friendly but was never truly close to anyone, and placed her trust in no one. She was the complete opposite of her husband, William Backhouse Astor, who had a reputation as a drunkard and a notorious philanderer. Fortunately for her, he preferred to indulge his vices far from the social scrutiny of New York society. Sailing on his yacht, Ambassador, the largest and most expensive vessel of its time. Whispers spread through the city about the young chorus girls who entertained on its decks and the cargo holds brimming with whiskey. Mrs. Astor, however, remained unbothered, serenely smiling and remarking that the sea air was beneficial for William's health, though she regrettably could not accompany him, as she had no particular talent for seafaring. What Mrs. Astor chose not to see simply did not exist. And so, this emotionally restrained woman, of average height, plump, not particularly attractive, with olive-toned skin, dark hair later replaced by a wig, and piercing gray eyes that missed nothing, reigned supreme within her select circle. In fashion, she favored black, occasionally replacing it with regal purple. At her gatherings, she literally shimmered, adorned with an abundance of diamonds. She was an idol, a figure to be revered, and her appearance reflected this status. During her legendary soirees, her vast Fifth Avenue mansions, filled with French furniture, tapestries, marble sculptures, grand fireplaces, and European silver, were transformed into floral wonderlands. As keepsakes, guests were presented with antique ivory fans, gold snuff boxes, and sapphire stick pins, while the cigarettes placed at each seat were wrapped in $100 bills signed by the evening's host. But guests did not attend for these trifles. They came to be seen. The most privileged among them were invited to sit beside Caroline on her velvet sofa, which provided the best view of the grand ballroom, a throne from which she ruled over New York's social elite. By midnight, the ball would come to an end, and as if by magic, small tables would appear among the guests, attended by footmen dressed in green livery with silver buttons embossed with the Astor family's self-proclaimed motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. After the lavish supper, some guests would retire to their homes, while others continued dancing and reveling until the early morning hours, when yet another meal was served. An invitation to Mrs. Astor's gathering was a golden key that unlocked doors, both to the grand mansions of her guests and to lucrative business ventures. To be left off her list was not just a social slight, it was a death sentence for ambition. No one who hoped for a profitable partnership or a prestigious marriage for their daughter could afford to be overlooked. It was a social black mark of the gravest kind. Many nouveau riche wives desperately tried to convince Ward McAllister of their noble ancestry, regaling him with tales of long-forgotten aristocratic grandmothers and aunts. Those who found such pleading beneath their dignity often opted for a long European sojourn to mask their exclusion. It was far preferable to say one was in France, seeking a finishing school for one's daughters, than to admit that an invitation from Mrs. Astor had never arrived. Yet, these European excursions could also serve as an alternative route into Caroline's circle. American heiresses, not necessarily of noble birth but fabulously wealthy by European standards, were prime targets for impoverished aristocrats in Britain and France. Even Mrs. Astor was willing to extend a welcome to the mother-in-law of a marquis. Between 1870 and 1914, 454 American women married into the European nobility, many of them wedding heirs to noble titles. Caroline's only true rival in New York society was Alva Vanderbilt, the formidable wife of a railroad magnate and a leader in the suffrage movement. Alva's daughter, Consuelo Vanderbilt, would later marry the 9th Duke of Marlborough. The Vanderbilts' first step toward social domination was the construction of a grand Fifth Avenue mansion, a true treasure house. To mark its completion, they hosted an extravagant costume ball, where the guest of honor was Alva's dear friend Consuelo Yznaga, the wife of Lord Mandeville, heir to the Duke of Manchester. It was Consuelo Yznaga who had introduced Alva, née Smith, to William K. Vanderbilt, heir to a vast railroad fortune. New York society could hardly resist the allure of associating with a soon-to-be duchess. The evening was destined to be a spectacle, with guests dressed as courtiers of the 18th century and exotic mandarins. Yet, as the excitement surrounding the grand event grew, Caroline Astor realized, to her great indignation, that she had not received an invitation. Worse still, her beloved daughter would not have the opportunity to showcase her meticulously rehearsed cotillion. When Mrs. Astor discreetly hinted at this oversight to Mrs. Vanderbilt, Alva, ever the expert in etiquette, replied that she simply could not extend an invitation first. Social protocol dictated that the older lady must first call upon the younger one. Caroline wasted no time in correcting the breach, paying an immediate visit to Alva, who then handed her the much-coveted invitation without delay. Later, Mrs. Astor would famously remark, "We have no right to exclude those whom the progress of this great country has thrust forward, provided they are not vulgar in speech or appearance." The time has come for the Vanderbilts. The cold rivalry between the two women endured until 1902, when Grace Vanderbilt finally dethroned Caroline Astor as the Queen of New York society. The decisive moment came when Grace invited Prince Henry of Prussia, the younger brother of Kaiser Wilhelm, to an exclusive dinner, and notably did not extend an invitation to Mrs. Astor. As the delighted society columns proclaimed the next day, Mrs. Astor will be sailing for Europe before lunchtime. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Please do not forget to support my channel by clicking like and subscribe buttons.